one group of people think that it's totally fine to make mistakes, and then there is another group which says we need to do our job correctly, try not to make mistakes, we can lose customers, it can damage our business. So the main thing is not to repeat the same mistake.
Mehmet Baha, welcome to the Safety Spotlight podcast.
Thank you for the invitation, Mark.
We're happy to have you here. Where does this podcast find you today?
I'm based in Berlin, Germany.
Berlin, Germany. Okay. Other side of the world there. We're out in Edmonton, Alberta. I'm super excited to get some perspectives from all over the world here. You've done some incredible work in the space of psychological safety. I'm eager to hear a little bit. I think a good place to start would be just hearing a little bit about where you're from professionally, how you got to where you are today, just giving us a rundown of your background.
Yes, my name is Baha. Actually, Baha is my last name and everyone calls me Baha. Originally, I'm from Cyprus. It's a small island in the Mediterranean, close to Turkey. And for the last 13 years, I've been living in Germany. Around 20 years ago, I got a scholarship from Fulbright and I did my master's in the US, in Washington, D.C., on the topic of conflict resolution. Then I started working around the world. I worked at United Nations as a consultant in the communications department in Turkey. After that, I moved to Ireland and I was one of the first employees of Facebook in Europe back then. Very interesting experience. At that time, Facebook had a very high level of psychological safety. Unfortunately, it's not true anymore. Anyways, meeting with Mark Zuckerberg, mentoring different teams, contributing to the exponential growth of the company. They were really special times. 4 years in Ireland, and after that I moved to Germany. And in Germany, I started working at a tech company. I was working directly with the CEO. And I was in charge of expanding partners in Latin America, Spain, India, and Middle East. And I had the chance to travel to different countries, do business with different organizations around the world. And also working closely with the CEO was an interesting experience. By the way, this German company does not exist anymore. Apple acquired the company. And for the last 8 years, I'm a trainer, consultant. I do learning sessions on the topic of psychological safety around the world, basically in 4 languages: English, Spanish, Turkish, and German. I've written 2 books. The first book is called Playbook for Engaged Employees. And the second book is called Creating Psychological Safety at Work. So it's pretty new, and it got testimonials from leading business thinkers like Daniel Pink, Amy Atkinson, and I'm also married. My wife is from Spain. So in my free time, I love to travel with my family, play basketball with my 8-year-old daughter, and also play percussion. I'm also a musician.
Okay, so you've been busy, to say the least.
Yes.
So let's jump right into the book. So it's called Creating Psychological Safety at Work, the essential guide to boosting team performance. This psychological safety is a term that's really being thrown around quite a lot today. But I'd like to hear from the expert himself. What fundamentally is psychological safety?
Yeah, psychological safety, inspired by the work of Amy Atkinson, leading academic on the topic. Psychological safety is a work environment where employees feel safe to express their questions, concerns, ideas, and mistakes. It's the responsibility of leaders, managers to create psychological safety. It's leaders and managers play a crucial role in creating such an environment. At the same time, it's the responsibility of all employees to contribute to a psychologically safe workplace. And there is a report of Gallup, and in this report, there are really interesting findings. When employees feel that their opinions count, so employees feel safe to express their opinions and their opinions are valued, it's basically a workplace of psychological safety. We see the following benefits: 27% reduction in employee turnover, 40% reduction in safety incidents. 40% reduction is huge number, and 12% increase in productivity. So psychological safety is a key aspect of high performing teams and organizations.
Some astonishing statistics, 40% reduction in safety incidents. You mentioned that a key part that I picked out there is that it's a team effort. It involves everybody. When you're going into an organization and you want to start building that, what are some of the first steps that organizations can take to start creating psychological safety?
Yeah, first steps. First, it's crucial to understand what's going on in the organization, what's going well, what can be improved. There are different reasons of that. In many cases, what I notice, regardless of the country or the sectors, one of the main starting points is with leadership, especially senior leadership. Senior leadership to have to be role model on this, to understand the concept, to put that into practice, and then spread it from senior leadership to the rest of the organization. So senior leadership plays a key role in that, and in many cases, I start with senior leaders on this journey.
Really does start at the top, and being the one at the top, you have to, I guess, in a way, demonstrate it first, and then, like the title implies, you have to lead, right, and kind of let other people see you doing that day in, day out.
I can give you one visible example. There is one bank in Singapore. It's called DBS. This bank, some years ago, was known as a very slow, bureaucratic bank. Long lines in front of its ATM machines. The machines were not working properly. Anyways, a new CEO comes. This new CEO is visionary and also revolutionary. The CEO says, no, we need to change the way we do business. So they start looking at other companies. And first they say, should we be like other banks in Singapore? Senior management says no. Should we be like regional banks in Australia? They say no. Should we be like global banks in the US? They say no. In any ways, we are not a huge global bank. They say we need to be like tech companies, like Netflix. Anyways, total change of mindset. And this bank, in some years, they improve the way they work. They become the world's #1 bank in many areas. They get a lot of awards. And in terms of psychological safety also played a key role in the transformation of the bank. The CEO, you can directly reach to the CEO. You have questions or ideas, he responds to your emails. So leader here, having an open communication with employees, creating a safe space where employees feel safe to express their questions, concerns, ideas. The CEO also does town halls and also other leaders periodically where they encourage employees to speak up. When leaders visit different offices, they try to have some human touch, create space for employees to speak up, share their concerns. So the email access, town halls, encouraging employees. And now when you look at this company, in the last employee survey that they did, 92% of employees, 92, so huge number, feel safe to speak up at work. And this is a very successful bank. So you see here senior leadership playing an important role, having direct access to employees, creating mediums, spaces, events for employees to speak up, encourage the employees to do so, etc.
So the benefits are clear. Fundamentally, the benefits are clear. It does sound like it initially requires some work to implement. For the leader that maybe you've encountered that says, well, this is all great, but it does sound like a lot of work and we're busy. We've got a lot on the go. What would you say that company, that organization, that leader, their people, what are they missing out on? What are the risks of not implementing psychological safety?
Yeah, interesting question. Normally, people that I talk with or organizations, they already know the benefits of this. They are one of the best organizations in the world in their areas. They want to keep their edge, take their leadership to the next level. So in most cases, they know. And the ones who don't know, normally I do not spend much energy on them because I prefer to work with those who understand. And let's continue with your question. In case that appears, of course, different organizations have different priorities. Not can everyone understand this or appreciate this concept or has resources, willingness, and openness to work on it. As I mentioned in the beginning of the podcast, in the case of meeting such resistors, what I basically do is to mention them these three statistics that I mentioned in the beginning. When employees feel that their opinions count, basically a workplace or psychological safety, we see the following benefits: 27% reduction in employee turnover. Now think about that when you are leading a big organization. It's millions, hundreds of millions dollars or euro. 40% reduction in safety incidents. Think about that in terms of absenteeism or employees ending up in hospitals, injured, or even fatalities. And 12% increase in productivity. Think about that in terms of the dollars gained. It's huge. And at the same time, I understand that certain organizations, maybe the leadership is not yet ready, and I respect that.
And I think that there's at a certain level, you have to start somewhere, right? And the best time to start was 20 years ago. The second best time is today, right?
Exactly.
Jump on in and get it done. I'm curious, you mentioned that you were one of the first employees of Facebook in Europe, and you've worked at various organizations throughout your career. What was that initial spark that kind of tuned you into psychological safety as a concept, and how did those early work experiences sort of influence where you've gone with it today?
Yeah, let's start with the second part of the question, my early work experiences. I worked at organizations with very high level of psychological safety and also with an organization that had relatively low level of psychological safety. Having these two extremes actually made me realize the importance of this. Just to give you an example, previously I worked at one organization, one company, and once I dared to ask a question to my manager, who was also the CEO, and his reply was, "That's a stupid question." And at that moment, I didn't know how to react to that. I felt, powerless. And since then, I tried not to ask him, a lot of questions. I was afraid of doing that. And what is worse, other employees started to imitate that. In a meeting, when you ask a question, sometimes you could get the response, "That's a stupid question." It was a workplace with low level of psychological safety. And contrasted with let's say Facebook at that time, it was total opposites. And especially the last experience with low level of psychological safety made me become more aware of this topic in terms of employee engagement, not only putting your heart but also your heart into work, and psychological safety is really crucial in that sense. And how did I start with this? Actually, I started with conflict resolution with the topic around 8 years ago. And I was doing trainings, I was talking with potential customers, and whenever they heard the phrase conflict resolution, it had a negative connotation, and people, were not very enthusiastic on the subject. Later, I changed it to collaborative leadership, which sounds more positive, more constructive. And at that time, 2016, 17, so 8-9 years ago, I created a model on collaborative leadership. And one aspect of it back then was on psychological safety. Of course, psychological safety at that time was not popular. And the key turning point was pandemic, COVID-19 2020, 2021, I did an online learning session. It was actually a conference in Denmark. Interestingly, majority of the participants were from North America, especially US and Canada. And many directors, VPs of global companies from North America loved the session. So it was like the trigger. And since then, especially since pandemic, I focused more on psychological safety, doing talks, learning sessions, trainings, workshops, in different parts of the world, working with different organizations in different sectors, from tech companies to manufacturing, logistics, IT, etc.
The conflict resolution piece is interesting to me there. And when I think about conflict resolution, you're correct. Like there is this negative connotation to it. And what was the alternative term that you said?
Collaborative leadership.
Collaborative leadership. And it almost seems that the one is nested within the other. So psychological safety is kind of the broader term, and then collaborative leadership can kind of fit in as an interwoven piece to that. Am I reading that correctly?
True,
Okay. It is, when I think of what's needed most in today's workplace, I think that communication fundamentally is the biggest piece to all of this, right? When we're not communicating properly, when we're not sharing ideas correctly, I think that we miss out on the all of the potential knowledge in the organization. When it comes to effective communication and understanding each other's sides, what are some of the key strategies to really being able to communicate effectively?
Yeah, to communicate effectively. I am thinking what kind of answer can I give you? Something different than maybe from others. There are a few points that come to my mind. So, trust, vulnerability, and clarity. Let's start with trust. So, to be able to communicate effectively, communication, to influence others, to work together successfully as a team, we need to create an environmental trust, which is one of the components of psychological safety. And there are actually four aspects of trust: competency, honesty, consistency, and good intentions. Let's start with competency. The more competent we are, the higher the likelihood for us to create trust in the team. Competency is the first one. The second one is honesty. Honesty is about keeping our promises. So let's say I promise something to you, to Mark. And then if I can keep that promise, then it has a positive effect on creating trust. The third one is consistency. So consistency means walking the talk. We as leaders talk about the importance of collaboration, working well with each other. But as leaders, we have meetings with one another and then we shout at each other, and employees, later hear that, our words do not match with what we say. So consistency, walking the talk. And last point is good intentions. If employees perceive that we are leaders or managers with good intentions, they are more likely to trust us, and we can communicate well with them. We can have good, relationship, which is based on this trust. So competency, honesty, consistency, good intentions. When we communicate, it's crucial for us to show these elements. The first one, trust. The second one is clarity. Clarity is the basic of good management. Also in the study of Google Project Aristotle, the key aspect of high-performing teams was psychological safety, and one of the other factors was clarity. Clear communication. When we communicate with our employees, colleagues, customers, stakeholders, suppliers, clarity. Clear communication is another important aspect. And last point is vulnerability. So when we communicate with others, it's not just a monologue, megaphone, one person talking and the other person listens. It's a dialogue. We are all human beings. No one is perfect. We can make mistakes, learn from them, and improve. The main thing is not to repeat the same mistake. And vulnerability is about, as leaders and managers, sometimes we can share with our colleagues a mistake we did at work, what we learned from it. The main focus is on the learning. And based on the learning, what did we do differently next time in the future? So vulnerability, trust, and clarity are key aspects to be able to communicate effectively and contribute to a successful team.
So there's a lot of ways that it breaks down, and there's clearly, I mean, you've thought about this for a long time, right? What really makes for good communication. I think that, obviously this applies to the white collar space, but also the blue collar. And I think fundamentally there's a lot of roles in today's society where, in particular guys, right, we have maybe a tougher time communicating and really letting our guard down, right? There can be some underlying, whether it be ego or whatever it might be. It can be tough to sort of open up that conversation and get it going. But I think to your point, you have to get it going at some point, and it comes from leadership, and then eventually you want to earn buy-in from everyone else. The way that you go about measuring this, I'm curious. So when you come into an organization, and not just communication, but psychological safety, what are some of the key points that you're looking at to assess if there's really good psychological safety or what they might be lacking?
Yeah. Nice question. Actually, I expected this question, and I put a post-it note in my book to the section about how to measure that. So it's based on the work of Prof. Amy Edmondson, leading academic on the topic. So there are basically 7 statements. I am happy to read out these 7 statements. And so it's a way to measure the level of psychological safety in a team. You can evaluate each and every statement either as strongly agree, neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree. The first statement is, if you make a mistake on this team, it is not held against you. The second one, members of this team are able to bring up problems and tough issues. You rate it again from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Third one, people on this team sometimes accept others for being different. Fourth one, it is safe to take a risk on this team. By risk here we mean calculated risks. Fifth one, it is not difficult to ask other members of this team for help. Sixth one, no one in this team would deliberately act in a way that undermines my efforts. And seventh one, working with members of this team, my unique skills and talents are valued and utilized. So by measuring this anonymously, we can have an idea about the level of psychological safety in a team. Recently I consulted and I helped one organization improve its performance. We measured anonymously the level of psychological safety in the organization. It was a relatively small organization, which is part of a global company. And as expected, the level of psychological safety was low. And then I did a workshop on the topic of high-performing teams, psychological safety. I also presented the results to be open, what's going well, what can be improved. And after that, I did a series of learning sessions on different aspects of psychological safety, feedback, collaboration, dealing with mistakes, etc. And after each learning session, they had time to put in practice what they learned. And eventually we could see that there were some improvements in the organization, improving the processes, improving the work, the way they work, communicate with one another, appreciate each other. So we saw improvement. As a final stage, after the end of learning sessions, after 9 months, we are going to measure it again to be able to clearly see the improvement.
Be able to stay consistent with that sort of thing.
Exactly.
It's not a one and done. You need to be able to measure it. And it's interesting that you're able to break it down into those seven, and then as long as you can be honest about your answer, I think that might be the key piece here. You can really get a decent baseline.
Yeah, in the case of this organization, previously they had one managing director. His leadership style was command and control. And anyways, this managing director left the organization. But before he left, employees were burned out. Employees started to leave the organization. The organization was not able to achieve its targets. The work environment was not good, to say it politely. And then the new managing director came and he noticed that certain employees, when they see each other in hallways, they didn't say hi to each other. He noticed that the new director, the managing director, noticed that employees were not collaborating well with one another, not communicating well. He was really concerned. He noticed this very low level of psychological safety, and he said, "Look, I want to start a new page here, fresh. For me, it's important to create this psychological safety, to be transparent, to be open, to involve employees, to appreciate them, to create a culture where we support each other, we have the same vision, we work on this, respect each other." So it was also a factor that helped us when we did the anonymous survey that employees gave, clear answers as expected, low level of psychological safety.
So it can really come down to little things day to day. Just the simple act of saying hi to each other, greeting each other. It almost, I mean, in my mind, builds sort of a snowball effect. Would that be correct to say? There's sort of a momentum you can gain?
Exactly. Small steps, taking action. I can give you a few examples. Certain organizations approach to me, decision makers, and they say, "Look, we are interested in psychological safety." And I have meetings with them, and I basically see two groups of business professionals. One of them, they have meeting with me. Immediately they go to the task and the business, no small talk. When I even say, "Hi, how are you?" "Good, fine." And then immediately, very work oriented, work focused. And then there are others as well. When before talking about business, we have small talk. "How are you?" We talk about the weather, maybe the family, small things that create human touch. And the second group is more successful in terms of creating psychological safety, because the future of work, especially with AI now, will be human-centered, and it will be based on psychological safety. And in these small instances, having meetings to create this environment of psychological safety, we need to sometimes do short check-ins. "How are you feeling? How are you today? What's the best, I don't know, business podcast you have heard? What's the best business advice you have received in your life?" Doing these small check-ins in the beginning contributes to creating a safe space for everyone. Strong teams focus not only on results but also on the relationships among each other. Weak teams focus only on results and KPIs. So in psychological safety, one of the key elements is human-centered leadership. How can we show humanity? Listening to others, showing empathy, showing compassion, rather than just focusing on the work. And it's also one of the ways to win not only the head, but also hearts of employees with these small, consistent actions that show human-centered leadership.
Really couldn't be more appropriate for the time, especially with AI and the role that technology is currently playing in the space, and being able to bring it back to a human element. I think it's key that you're bringing this up. From my understanding, it's an absolutely integral piece of success. And when you break it down to just results, I think that you're missing a huge chunk of the picture, an absolutely massive piece.
Special thanks to our sponsor, BIS Safety Software, one of the leading safety and compliance software applications on the market today. We wanted to shout out the team for their new Lone Worker technology, designed to provide enhanced protection and peace of mind for workers while they are working alone. It includes features like check-in schedules, automated notifications, and you can designate supervisors to receive alerts. This Lone Worker technology helps round out the full scope of their safety management software. Lone Worker is just the tip of the iceberg. See everything they have to offer at bissafety.ca.
AI, obviously, it's a buzzword. I've heard it. I love the tools that are out there. Everyone's talking about it. What roles does AI play in psychological safety?
AI can have few roles here. Let's start with the first one, the bias. So these AI tools, the technology are created by humans, and at the same time it might have bias. So for us, when we try to create a psychologically safe space, for us it's important to be able to be aware that AI can have biases. Let's say we use AI to create, I don't know, in marketing images or copy text, etc. And to minimize that risk, we need to have a diverse and inclusive group to be able to check those answers and make sure that we are inclusive. We include different employees, different, the needs of our target group. So be aware of the bias of AI and make sure to have an inclusive and diverse group of employees to check on that. The second one, AI is improving its intelligence at a very fast level. So analyzing things, maybe reading millions of documents, it can help us improve, efficiency in certain tasks. And what will remain in the future for us will be our humanity, our ability to connect with others, our ability to show compassion, our ability to show empathy. I can give you one example that was during pandemic. One organization had to fire, I think, 20% of its employees. They did it in a very automatic fashion, sort of like AI style. And employees who were fired received an email which included a link to a pre-recorded message. They click on the link, pre-recorded message, CEO, firing them. And then after watching that video, automatically they are cut off from company systems. Is it efficient? Is it very fast? Yeah, but it's not humane. The other company, Stripe, it's a technology company with 2 headquarters, California and Dublin. They also had to fire employees. They did it in a very humane way. First of all, founders send an email accepting their responsibility, apologizing to the employees. They are aware of this. It was their decision. They hired a lot and there were changes in the market, and mainly it was their decision, apologizing, and then giving employees benefits. Before going to the benefits, one of the things was to have one-on-ones, face-to-face, with their managers about the situation. And in case they have the company's laptop, they can keep it. In case they have stocks, without vesting, they can keep it. The company would give them support and help in finding their next jobs. They would get alumni email addresses to be able to stay in touch. Having this alumni email address even makes you feel special. They did it in a very humane way. So having this compassion, showing empathy, doing it in a humane way, writing, sending handwritten notes, showing this connection, it will play even a bigger role in the future.
Just some of those ideas I hadn't heard about, like the alumni email. That's a phenomenal idea.
Mm-hmm.
Like these are things that it goes the extra step, and trying to put myself in the place of nobody wants to be there, but if you're let go, that feeling
Mm-hmm.
is horrible. It's not something anyone wants to be in, and going that extra mile to add a human layer to it and create that psychological safety, not just within the organization, but also, when you have to part ways at certain points, it doesn't stop really. It keeps going throughout. There's a continuum. You bring them into the organization. If people leave, there's still fundamentally it has to remain kind of throughout that life cycle.
Absolutely, not only for the departing employees, but also for the remaining ones. Once you treat the departing employees with respect, dignity, the remaining employees are more likely to have that psychological safety in the workplace.
And to be able to see that it's been demonstrated, you earn that buy-in in a way.
Exactly.
Here's something that I was thinking about. As you were going through the list of ways that you can measure psychological safety, one of them is, and I correct me if I'm wrong, not blaming others for their mistakes. Was that?
If you make a mistake on this team, it is not held against you.
If you make a mistake on the team, it's not held against you. There's sort of, and maybe I think it'll be good to get some clarity on this when it comes to accountability versus psychological safety, or maybe there isn't an opposition there. How do we still hold people accountable without maybe that blame component?
How to hold people accountable without a blame. About the mistakes, first, we need to distinguish between different mistake types. What I see from business leaders is, to make it in a very simple, one group of people think that it's totally fine to make mistakes, and it's fine. We learn from this. And then there is another group which says, we need to do our job correctly, try not to make mistakes, because if you make mistakes, we can lose customers, it can damage our business. So try to do everything correctly. Actually, none of them is correct. We need to understand different mistake types and then deal accordingly with them. So there are basically 4 mistake types: unacceptable mistakes, improvable mistakes, complex mistakes, and intelligent mistakes. The last 2, complex and intelligent, are taken directly from the work of A. Magnuson. The first 2, unacceptable and improvable mistakes, I created them inspired by the work of A. Magnuson. So let's start with unacceptable mistakes. Let's say I work in a factory. Despite all the training, resources, support, help, guidance, hardware, I do not wear a safety helmet, and then there is an accident and I suffer an injury. This is an example of unacceptable mistake. Of course, we need to understand the reasons behind that, and one of the ways to deal with it is to warn the employee, okay? So that the same mistake doesn't happen. Another example, let's say I work in a bank. I have access to a large amount of data. I get this data and I sell it to a third party. This is an unacceptable mistake. This is actually a gross misconduct. In that case, we can, sanction employee, consider parting ways. Of course, we need to do it in a legal way, giving the employee the option to appeal, etc. Unacceptable mistakes. As leaders and managers, we need to ensure that unacceptable mistakes do not happen at all in our workplace, and in case they happen, they should happen very rarely. Second mistake type, improvable mistakes. Let's say we have an unfinished product or service. We present this to potential customers. The idea is to learn the shortcomings of the product or service and to improve it. Allow improvable mistakes. Learn the shortcomings to improve the product or service. Third mistake type is complex mistakes. Complex mistakes, in the case of complex mistakes, we need to analyze them in a systematic way to understand the root causes to prevent them. One example, this happened, it's a real case, it happened in Netherlands. One kid is in the hospital, child, patient. Then nurse gives this child medication. Then this child passes away. Who is responsible here? at first sight, without taking a look at different factors, one might say, of course, the nurse, because the nurse gave this medication. Maybe it was overdose, it was wrong medication, whatever. When you talk with the nurse says, the medical doctor called me on the phone and gave me the instructions, and I followed the instructions, and I gave exactly the medication at the dose recommended by the medical doctor. So it's not my fault. It's the responsibility of the medical doctor. You go and talk with the medical doctor says, we have a lot of night shifts. We are really tired here. We many times express this to the hospital's management. They are not decreasing the night shifts. This has negative influence on our attention span, focus on the work. We are tired and we cannot really focus well. We, many times protested this, and the hospital management is not taking any action on this. So when you look at this case, you see this mistake at multiple levels, systematic levels. Nurse, medical doctor, the working conditions, the management style of the hospital, at a systemic level, have influence on this. In many cases, complex mistakes are due to multiple levels of complexity. In the case of complex mistakes, analyze them in a systematic way, understand the root causes to prevent it from happening again. Before intelligent mistakes, in many organizations, majority of mistakes happen in improvable and complex mistakes. Intelligent mistakes, let's say you create a breakthrough product or service, something not done before, not invented before. You launch this product or service to the market. It is not that successful. Still, we get really important insights from the market maybe next time to be able to do it better. In the case of intelligent mistakes, celebrate people who make intelligent mistakes. One example, Google's project, Loon. Google had one project to use balloons to beam internet all over the world. Once they started this project, they were testing different sizes and textures of balloons in the air to be able to beam the internet. In many cases, these balloons were not successful. They were not durable. They were not fit for this, falling down. It was all series of mistakes, failures, but they were all intelligent failures. It was a breakthrough project. From each failure, they learned. And then, so in a nutshell, unacceptable mistakes, ensure that they do not happen at all. In case they happen, they should happen rarely. Warn or sanction employees for those. Improvable mistakes, allow them. Complex mistakes, understand the root causes to prevent them from happening again. Intelligent mistakes, celebrate people making intelligent mistakes. And last point about these, mistakes, rather than asking who did this and how to punish that person, we need to ask what are the reasons for this, what contributed to this, and what can we do next time to prevent this from happening again. Because if we start with who did and how to punish, then people do not share information. Or we find maybe one scapegoat, we fire that person, but we really miss the opportunity to learn what happened, why it happened, what were the conditions, what are our learnings. So instead of who made it, how to punish, what causes, what can we learn from this, and what can we do to prevent this from happening again, especially for improvable, complex, and intelligent mistakes, and even for certain unacceptable. Yeah.
That you're breaking it down into so many different components, and I think this is so important, especially for the area of safety. Obviously, there's certain situations where a lot of the time it can be unacceptable, but being able to identify what area a certain mistake lands in and then appropriately address it can really make a huge difference. If you're going way too far one way and you're not I shouldn't say punish, it's not the right word. You're not appropriately addressing a, unacceptable mistake. That's one way. Or maybe you're, not taking the opportunity to make learning examples of mistakes that are more on the complex side or the intelligent side, which is something that I hadn't even. An intelligent mistake it's a fantastic way to put it.
Yeah. And in many cases, when I do learning sessions, this mistake aspect is one of the most loved and aspect of the training, where employees, the participants, get actionable insights and they start implementing that in their workplaces.
Frameworks are incredibly helpful, especially when you're going to implement them in an organization. Can you tell us a little bit about in your book the 16-32-64 framework and what
Yeah.
that is?
So 16, 32, and 64. 16, the book includes 16 inspiring stories from around the world, organizations which work on creating psychological safety. 32, practical tools and approaches to create psychological safety at work. And 64, thought-provoking questions that you answer that help you create your psychological safety plan, action plan, and strategy.
So there's a ton of examples to really see how this actually can benefit an
Yes.
organization. For you yourself, I'm curious, and I like to ask this question to really anyone who comes on the show. The work that you're doing is incredibly important. What is the most meaningful aspect of your work?
The most meaningful aspect of my work. The most meaningful aspect, I think, is once I see participants taking action and making the world of work a little bit better place, one person at a time. And seeing that, for me, gives me the joy. I can give you one example. Recently, I did a learning session for one international organization. The participants were mid-level managers, mid and senior. And in the training, I presented them an approach about failing forward. So it includes 4 aspects of failing forward. Failing forward basically means you make mistakes, you learn from them, and improve. And one of the participants, and I showed them some inspiring examples. And one of the participants later, she said, "Look, I'm really inspired by this example and this approach. What I'm going to do is, once I come back to work next week, I'll gather my team, and then we are now working on a project. And I'll be the one leading this, and I will encourage them to share with me their mistakes and their learnings out of this in this project. Mistakes and what they learned from this. We are going to create a report, and I'm going to share that report with everyone in the organization so that others can learn from our mistakes and learnings, so the same mistakes are not repeated in the company." Maybe it sounds like a simple step, but at the same time, it's a big, initiative to do this, to take a step, to implement and, contribute to the success of the organization. So seeing these steps from participants, not only learning something, but also taking action, it is the most meaningful aspect of my work.
Almost a butterfly effect to it, right? One organization that has that impact, makes that change, other organizations will see it, people will see it. This will really change not just one space, but it could really, at a certain level, change the way that the world kind of operates in and around the workplace and in your personal life too, right? These aren't just skills that only apply to the workplace. These are things that can really have an impact, in all aspects of life. When it comes to the legacy that you want to leave, what does that look like?
Yeah, the legacy. So the legacy in terms of work, I want to be remembered as a person who contributed to making organizations more human-centered and more psychologically safe in my work, through my books, my talks, learning sessions, and also as a father, as a husband, to be remembered as a father or husband that had a loving relationship with their family and his friends.
It's an important thing to think about, and clearly you're doing it, and you're on that path. In terms of what's next for you, what are the big projects that, obviously you just wrote this book. That's going great. It's receiving incredible reception. What are some of the next things that are on your plate?
Yeah, next thing maybe is to work on the third book. I said maybe, actually, it's always in the back of my mind. I'm already taking notes, following organizations. I'm always looking out for inspiring workplaces that create psychological safety, highly engaged employees, high-performing teams. Recently, I was in Oman. It's a country in Middle East below Dubai. And in that conference, I met one CEO. She's the only female CEO of an insurance company in Oman. Super smart lady, and she was talking about her team, and she says, this is the best team I can imagine. She encourages employees to speak up. So I'm always looking for inspiring examples from organizations, and to help me write the next book, maybe on psychological safety or maybe on adaptability quotient. Previously it was IQ. In 1990s it was EQ, emotional intelligence. And now it's becoming adaptability quotient. So how fast we can adapt to this fast changing world, climate change, wars, a geopolitical situation, and the political situation in the US. And, you know, our world is becoming more and more complicated and challenging. And how good we can adapt to this, unlearn, become resilient, etc. So I'm looking for ideas on this, reading, researching, and trying to find good examples for the next. Yeah.
That's something that, as humans, I think that we naturally, that's probably our strength, is our adaptability. There's sort of an unfortunate reality that we don't really solve problems until they need to be solved. We're not very good at looking forward and solving them until we really need to. And I think you're totally right that the times that we live in right now, we're kind of in a space where we need to. We're kind of pushed into this. And I'm hopeful about the future and that we'll be able to adapt there.
Yeah, same here.
Where can people find your work? You've got a website, the book.
Yes, so people can find me on LinkedIn. So when you're at Mehmet Baha, you should be able to see me, MEHMETBAHA. And the book is on Amazon, worldwide. On Amazon, you can find it. And also you can get free resources on psychological safety when you visit solutionfolder.com, solutionfolder.com/free-resources. So solutionfolder.com/free-resources. There you can see some resources on psychological safety.
But we'll include the links in the video down below here.
Wonderful.
Mehmet Baha, appreciate you coming on the podcast. It's an important message, and thank you for taking the time.
It was my pleasure, Mark. Thank you.